Today we're going to be learning about refugees. We'll talk about what defines a refugee, the current state of refugees in the world, the US, and Tennessee, and how refugees impact American society. Let's start with the basics. What defines a refugee? The term refugee was codified in international law in the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. The 1951 Convention defined a refugee as someone outside of their country of origin who is unable or unwilling to return due to a well-founded fear of persecution because of their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. To simplify, a refugee is a person who has left their home country and can't go back because it's no longer safe for them there. Refugees come from many diverse backgrounds. They're normal people like you and me, but their lives were turned upside down due to conflict or persecution. They come from all walks of life and education. While some refugees were farmers, drivers, or shopkeepers in their home countries, others were doctors, engineers, businessmen and women, political dissidents, US military contractors, and much, much more. Understanding this can inform our behaviors and practices when working with refugees. To better understand the global conditions surrounding refugees, we need to look at the data. According to the UNHCR, the international body which monitors and aids refugees, 79.5 million people were displaced globally by the end of 2019. Not all of these individuals were refugees according to the international definition which we talked about before, so let's break it down further. Of the 79.5 million displaced individuals as of 2019, 26 million met the international definition of a refugee. These are people who have already fled their country, who are unable or unwilling to return because of a well-founded fear of persecution. 45.7 million have been forced from their homes, but have not yet fled their home country, making them internally displaced people. 4.2 million people are asylum seekers. These are those who have fled their home country, but their status as a refugee has not yet been determined. 3.6 million people are Venezuelans who have fled their home country due to political turmoil and socio-economic instability. Many are not registering for refugee procedures, but are instead opting for alternative legal forms of stay in their host countries, which is why they are counted as a separate group by the UNHCR. One way the international community has tried to help is to resettle refugees from their host countries to a third country. While it can be life-changing for those who receive resettlement, each year resettlement countries take in less than 1% of the world's total refugee population. In 2019, just under 110,000 refugees of the 26 million global refugees were resettled. The US has historically led the global refugee resettlement program in terms of number of refugees it's resettled each year. Between 2009 and 2019, the United States welcomed 55% of all refugees resettled globally. Now, you may wonder what that process looks like for refugees to come to the US. The resettlement process is fairly complex, but we can break it down into these 5 steps. First, to qualify for resettlement, individuals must meet the international definition of a refugee. Simply put, they must have fled their country and have a well-founded fear of persecution, which prevents them from returning home. Next, individuals must register and interview with officials from the UNHCR, who determine the individual's status as a refugee. Third, if the UNHCR determines that an individual meets the definition of a refugee, they're referred to the US State Department for resettlement. Most individuals will not make it past this step in the process, since less than 1% of refugees are resettled each year. Many individuals will instead live in established camps or cities within their host countries, but their experiences differ widely depending on where they are located. Even for those who are resettled, this is often the longest step in the process, with most people waiting years to be accepted and resettled. Once a person has been accepted by the US State Department to move forward with resettlement, they go through extensive screening. The refugee's biographical information is checked against multiple US intelligence databases to ensure the individual is not a threat to national security. This is one of the most thorough screening processes for coming to the US. In addition to these extensive security screenings, individuals receive several health screenings both before and after their arrival to the US to mitigate the potential for bringing viruses or disease into the country. Finally, individuals arrive and are resettled by one of 9 resettlement agencies. These agencies provide case management to help clients find housing, English language training, and employment, along with other services. Now that we have a basic understanding of the refugee resettlement process, let's look at the number of refugees resettled to the U.S. The number of refugees resettled to the U.S. has varied over the years. The numbers vary based on current needs and conflicts in the world. For example, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, many refugees were accepted into the U.S. from former Soviet states. Refugee resettlement is also significantly affected by the political sentiment of the time. This can be seen with the low number of admissions following the attacks of September 11, 2001, and the few years following. Another recent example was in 2016, when refugee admissions were raised to help European nations who were in the midst of the Syrian refugee crisis. Where refugees are resettled within the U.S. varies widely and is largely dependent on each state's capacity to handle the admissions. Here we see a heat map of refugee resettlement by each state during fiscal year 2019. As you can see, some states like Texas, Washington, New York, and California resettle more individuals than other states. Most states, including Tennessee, receive at least a few hundred refugees each year. In fiscal year 2019, Tennessee resettled 692 refugees. Refugees in Tennessee are resettled to one of 4 cities: Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, or Knoxville. The number of refugees resettled to Tennessee each year aligns with the trends seen on the national scale. Clients are predominantly resettled to Nashville, but are resettled to Memphis, Chattanooga, and Knoxville as well. Resettlement across Tennessee is overseen by the Tennessee Office for Refugees, but conducted by 4 refugee resettlement agencies. In Nashville, refugees are resettled by Catholic Charities and the Nashville International Center for Empowerment. World Relief conducts resettlement to Memphis, and Bridge Refugee Services oversees resettlement to both Chattanooga and Knoxville. These agencies do critical work to help refugees find success building their new lives in the United States. We know that we help refugees by resettling them here in the US, but how do refugees contribute to society once they arrive? Here are 5 ways refugees are a benefit to the United States. Refugees bring diversity, create jobs, pay taxes, lay down roots, and reflect America's founding values. Now let's talk about these in greater depth. First, refugees bring diversity to our communities. They bring new ideas and cultural traditions which help brighten our society. Americans today have ancestry from across the world, and many of the cultural icons that make us American are the product of immigrants, including things from blue jeans and hamburgers, which were both invented by immigrants, to Apple, whose founder Steve Jobs was the son of a Syrian refugee. The new ideas refugees bring to the US can lead to innovations like those blue jeans and hamburgers. These ideas can spark business creation. Compared to the US-born population, refugees have a higher rate of entrepreneurship. In addition to creating jobs, refugees strengthen local economies by filling jobs that employers have difficulty filling. Some criticize the refugee resettlement program because of the initial cost to the American people, but in the long run, refugees are a net fiscal benefit. A recent study by the Department of Health and Human Services found that from 2005 to 2014, refugees actually paid $63 billion more in taxes than they received in government services. Paying taxes is just one way in which refugees lay down roots in America. Another way in which they do so is by becoming citizens. As of 2017, over 84% of refugees who had lived in the US for 16 to 25 years had received citizenship. For immigrants in general, over the same period, only 50% had received citizenship. This is a sign that refugees are here to stay, so they have a vested interest in improving their communities. Finally, refugee resettlement reflects core American values. Here are just several exemplified by the resettlement program: the right to equal treatment, the assurance of human rights and dignity, protection against discrimination, and finally, the belief that all people are created equal and possess certain unalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To that end, President George Washington stated, "The bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and respectable stranger, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions." By definition, refugees are oppressed and persecuted, and we now have the opportunity to live up to the ideals which established this country and receive refugees into the bosom of America with open arms.